Hello, listeners. This is Kat, and welcome back to Put Your Hands Up Podfics. This will be the reading of the short fic entitled, Please Listen to What I Cannot Say Out Loud. Here's the summary. Hizashi is instantly by his side, cupping his face frantically. Shouta seldom cries. Sho, what's wrong? What's happening? He asked frantically. Kacchan told me to kill myself, Kacchan. Shouta exhales harshly, as the words and their meaning filter through his mind. The shock and grief are so strong it leaves Shouta breathless. Just as quickly, the sadness is suddenly replaced with concern. But it's like a fragile glass bowl, and the shock and sadness sit nestled inside it. The concern and blanketing calm are forced, stitched together manually, thread by thread. The real emotions try to splash over the edge, try to crack the glass. What an idiot. He could get in so much trouble. With that thought, all the foreign emotions begin to retreat, likely being forced down, and then Shota's head is in his own once more. That finally seals it for Shouta. These aren't his thoughts or feelings. He is hearing someone else's thoughts and feelings, experiencing what they do. The question is, who? This fic is 3 chapters with just over 13,000 words. Here's Chapter 1. Chapter 1. Bitter Silence. Shouta Aizawa is in the middle of his nightly patrol. He has about 2 hours to go, and so far it's been a nearly silent night. This seldom happens. It's usually a bunch of unrelated incidents or one big annoying incident. It reminded Shouta of small prey in the woods who disappear at the sound of a bigger predator. The run-of-the-mill villains have also disappeared, and Shouta wonders if they also sense some larger danger. Shouta fears it's just that when he hears a scream from what sounds like just a few blocks over. It cuts out suddenly, which doesn't bode well for the one who screamed. Shouta leaps from rooftop to rooftop as he heads towards where he heard the noise. He stops, rolling down into a crouch within the shadows when he hears some muffled chatter in the female voice from before. She is still screaming, but it sounds like it's muffled by something. Shouta peeks over the edge to see what he is working with, while continuing to keep himself low and out of sight. He sees a few thugs ferreting what appears to be crates of weapons out at the back of a storehouse and loading them into a parked van. There appear to be 2 buff men with unknown quirks and a female with a mutant quirk. On top of her head is a bluish puffed-up area that almost looks like she's wearing an inflated shower cap. Her hair looks like long purple squiggles that scream, "You don't want to be touched by these." Overall, she reminds him of a Portuguese man-o'-war. He mentally notates that he should try not to touch or be touched by this woman. If he remembers correctly, the original animal is not deadly, but it's supposed to hurt like a bitch. The 2 men continue shuttling crates as the jellyfish woman supervises with a scathing look. The woman who he had heard scream earlier is tied up. She has long brown hair that is currently covering her face. Deep purple marks around one of her arms only further confirmed Shota's theory. She sobs quietly into the fabric they have shoved in her mouth. Whether it's the pain, the fear, or both, Shouta can't be sure. He watches them a moment or two longer as he tries to dissect a way that he can take out the jellyfish woman in one go, before he swings down into the fray. His feet make impact with the first thug, who he knocks unconscious immediately. The jellyfish woman is too far away, and he doesn't know if hitting the inflated pouch on her head would knock her out anyway. Better to take care of the unknown variables first, than waste an opportunity and have to fight all 3 of them at once. He uses the villain's moment of shocked silence to slap some zip ties on the man's wrists to try to minimize the chance he will rejoin the fray later. He wants to put some around the man's ankles as well, but the villain behind him has a faster reaction time than some of his students. He will give him that. The man comes at Shouta, who flips out of the way in the nick of time. He flips back around to face the 2. The jellyfish woman seems to have caught up but merely watches. She clearly underestimates Shouta, and he tries to use this to his advantage as he refocuses on the other man. The man in question pulls a few throwing knives out of his pocket before running his tongue over them with a sneer. It doesn't take much for Shouta to realize he probably doesn't want that to touch him either. Fuck, 2 long-distance fighters, Shouta thinks, registering the man who he knocked out was most likely their close-range fighter, if he had to make a wild guess. The man launches 2 knives at him, and Shouta rolls to avoid one while letting the second be deflected by the end of his capture scarf. Whatever the man coated the knives with doesn't seem to affect the metal fabric, but given the look the man gave when he licked it, Shouta highly doubts the same could be said about its effect on skin. In his efforts to get away from the knives, he ended up closer to the jellyfish woman. She seems to have reevaluated how big of a threat Shouta is because she lunges for him. Two hair tentacle things shoot towards him, and he barely dodges them. The woman gets a glint in her eye before she refocuses her attention and sends them towards the woman still tied up on the ground, who has been watching the whole fight with wide eyes. Shouta darts between them, and the jellyfish woman takes that chance to grab him around the arms with two of the stingers. Seemingly realizing his sleeves protect him from any stings, he has never been so relieved his jumpsuit covers practically his whole body. She growls as she hurls him out of the alley. Shouta is flying through the air. In that split second, he can't find anything he would get his capture scarf to anchor to in time. He accepts the impact that is about to come, and yet is surprised when he hurtles into something small and soft that makes an interesting oof sound, as Shouta's body weight no doubt knocks the air out of the stranger's lungs. They both skid across the ground before the body behind him hits the wall with a choked cry. As soon as they come to a stop, Shouta is back on his feet. He flips around, expecting to see the first villain he fought earlier, but is surprised to see a small boy with green hair instead. The kid appears to be unconscious from the impact. He must have just been walking by at the wrong time. Fuck, kid. Where did you come from? He thinks before noticing the trickle of blood coming out of the kid's hairline. Shouta's concern doubles. He can see both the man and the jellyfish woman heading towards him out of the corner of his eye. No time to check him out yet. He picks the kid up before flipping over the two villains and running towards the tied-up woman. He quickly takes out his knife and cuts the ropes with practiced ease before depositing the kid into the woman's lap. Watch him for a moment, please. He may have a concussion. She nods seriously before pulling the kid closer to her, with a determined look in her eyes. She had been terrified this entire time, rightfully. But with something to protect, she seems to gain a new kind of focus. He turns back around to face the two villains who don't at all seem happy that Shouta had just catapulted over them, making them look like fools. Good. Anger may cause them to make a mistake. However, with now two potential victims in one place, Shouta will need to keep himself between the civilians and the thugs. This will also limit his movement. Plus, that kid may be hurt because Shouta slammed into him. Sure, he was thrown, but he shouldn't have let the jellyfish lady capture him in the first place, much less throw him with Shouta not being aware another kid was there, no less. The jellyfish woman is closest, so he starts with her, trying to be mindful not to let her stingers touch his hands or face. He throws a punch to her jaw, which she ducks under. She doesn't see the knee to her gut coming. It hits hard, and he ducks as her stingers come directly for his face. He bends backward to avoid them, and as he does, he sees the other man hurtle a knife at the two civilians huddling at the end of the alley. The woman tugs the boy down low, so only she is in the line of impact, before she squeezes her eyes shut in anticipation. Shouta swears he sees a shimmering wave come off of her, and out towards the rest of the alley. He doesn't have time to ponder it, however, as he sends his scarf out as quickly as he can. It wraps around the hilt of the knife just moments from impact. His scarf pulls taut with the action, and it hovers a moment in midair as the woman opens her eyes, letting out a surprised breath as she takes in the knife's proximity to her face. Shouta rips his scarf back in the opposite direction. It effectively sends the knife flying back at its thrower with a rush. The villain, not expecting one of his knives to be turned on him, only gapes in fear. Shouta activates his quirk, hoping whatever he coated it with isn't deadly. Yet as soon as the knife sinks into the man's upper arm, the man is screaming in agony. His eyes roll back and his entire arm turns a deep shade of purple. Shouta winces, realizing his earlier thought that the venom was also a mutation quirk was correct. He is also glad he did not let the woman or kid get hit by that. It does not look like it feels good. He also has to wonder if at least two of the three villains having mutation quirks is just a coincidence or if they researched two patrols out here. The jellyfish woman screams with rage. "Your quirk wasn't supposed to work against us," she spits. She looks annoyed at the event so far, which only further cements the idea that she knew Eraserhead would be out here, and thought mutant quirks would render him useless. Then again, when he arrived, they hadn't said anything or even looked shocked beyond the fact that one of their men was unconscious. It would seem they expected him to show and were not worried about it. He has a moment to hope it was only a theory on her part and not some wide-known fact. He works hard to keep his quirk under wraps. His thoughts are cut off as the woman lunges at him, stingers poised for attack. He turns to the side, ending up behind her as she passes him by. As he had moved, he had wrapped the end of a scarf tightly around his hand. He uses his protected hand to give a swift hit to the pressure point on the side of the woman's neck. The woman tries to spin around to Shouta, but her eyes are already rolling back in her head as her blood pressure most likely skyrockets. She falls to the ground with a sluggish thump, and he quickly cuffs her wrist and ankles with zip ties, being careful not to touch any of the woman's long hair. He does the same for the knife guy, and finally finishes binding the first man he knocked out. He is grateful the man decided to just continue his nice little nap. He gives a sweep of the area to make sure no other villains hide in the shadows before sending a quick text to Detective Shouta letting him know his location. Then he makes his way over to the two civilians. Shouta begins to give them a look-over now that all threats have been neutralized. He takes a glance over the woman. She has some red squiggly lines on her arms, no doubt from the jellyfish lady, and most likely the cause of the scream Shouta had heard. Other than that, she just looks kinda tired. Her body shakes a bit as the adrenaline no doubt begins to wear off. Still, he asks, "Any injuries besides the burn?" "No," she replies. "I was just walking by when I noticed them. The tentacle lady grabbed me with her hair and it felt like fire. Then they gagged me and tied me up. I don't think they planned to let me live," she says with a slight wobble as if that realization had only just now hit. "Well, you did," Shouta says. He isn't the best at comforting people, but the simple truth seems to calm her down a bit, and she gives him a small thankful smile as he looks over the boy. The blood from earlier seems to have dried on the boy's head and hair, but it doesn't look like the wound itself is bleeding anymore. It looks like it's a small gash from where the top of his head hit the brick wall. Shouta is relieved it stopped bleeding and doesn't appear to need stitches, but he is still concerned that the boy hasn't woken up yet. Just then, a couple of squad cars and EMS pull up. Shouta picks the boy from the woman's arms and gestures with his head to follow him. He has some medical training, but if the EMS are here, they can give the boy a much more thorough look-over. Detective Shouta gets out of the first squad car as the EMS personnel pile out of the ambulance and begin to set up. Shouta meets the detective halfway and watches as the man's intelligent eyes sweep over the scene, quickly getting a general idea of what went down. He glances down at the boy in Eraserhead's arms with a raised, concerned brow. "Is he okay? He looks awfully young," the detective asks. "He may have a concussion, hard to say. One of the villains threw me, and he had the misfortune of walking by just in time to cushion the impact between me and a brick wall. I should have been more careful," Shouta says with a frown. "I'm sure you did all you could, given the circumstances. Don't be so hard on yourself, Eraserhead." Shouta frowns harder and says nothing. At this point, the EMS has set up and the woman is already having her burn looked over. "Don't let any of your officers touch the woman without gloves. I think her quirk is similar to a jellyfish. I don't think it would kill anyone, it seems, but it does hurt like a bitch if that woman's skin is any indicator," Shouta says as he gestures to the brown-haired woman over with EMS. The detective nods before repeating the order into his comms. Aizawa sets the small green-haired boy on the second gurney, so he too can be fussed over by the medics. He doesn't walk far off, however. He still feels immensely guilty for knocking the kid out, and pending medical clearance plans to walk the kid home should he regain consciousness. He watches as one of the medics begins to treat a star-shaped burn on the boy's arm. And he frowns, thinking back. "The jellyfish woman never touched him," he says to the medic treating him. The man frowns back at him. "He has several burns over his arms, and that's just as far as I've checked," the medic responds, unease in his voice. If possible, Shota's concern for the kid quadruples. In the heat of things, Shouta hadn't had time to even question why a boy of his age is out this late, and on this side of town. Was he being abused by someone? Had he run away? "I'll have to ask the kid when he wakes up. Make sure I'm not taking him back to a dangerous environment," Shouta thinks, feeling several red flags raise all at once. He never gets the chance to. The kid's eyes flutter open as he takes a moment to understand his surroundings. Upon seeing the medic and Shouta, and then glancing down and seeing his sleeve has been pulled up, the boy's eyes bulge and he rips his arm away from the medic. "Hey, kid, it's all right, you're safe." Shouta goes to reassure, but cuts himself off as a wall of intense fear hits him. It sneaks up on him so suddenly it almost makes him nauseous, and his head feels like it's splitting open. Despite himself, Shouta grips his head and braces his other hand on his knee. Shouta gets himself back under control pretty quickly. He is a trained professional, after all. But the brief moment of him bent over is all the kid needs. He scrambles down from the gurney and takes off running. "Wait, kid, stop," Shouta says, taking off after him. "We just want to make sure you're okay." Shouta slips around to the same corner the kid did, but the boy is already gone. The detective catches up, running up beside him. "Damn, the kid is a fast runner," Shouta comments. The pit of worry in Aizawa's stomach only grows bigger. He can think of many reasons a kid of that age with no training may be so good at escaping. Not many of them are good. And what was the feeling that overcame Shouta? He hasn't felt fear like that in a long time. The only thing he can compare it to is a fight he and Hizashi got into with a villain a couple years back. There was a moment where Hizashi got pretty hurt. There had been so much blood, and Shouta wasn't sure if the man was going to be okay. Luckily, it had looked a lot worse than it actually was, but the overwhelming fear and dread that he may lose Zashi had left an imprint on his brain. For him to feel such a level of fear now. Maybe it's the boy's quirk, he thinks to himself. He imagines if it is, then other kids wouldn't take to him too kindly. Shouta himself had grown up with what others refer to as a villain's quirk. He grimaces at the memories before sharing his guess with Tsukauchi. The detective hums a bit in agreement. Should we keep an eye out for him? Yeah, Shouta agrees, but more just out of concern with his well-being. If we can figure out who he is, I would like to check his situation. The medical team found burns on him, and I know he didn't get stung the way the other woman did. Tsukauchi frowns at the implication. We will want to be careful, then. He seemed quite skittish. I'll tell the other officers. Thanks, Detective. Shouta replied, still gazing in the direction the boy had gone. As if he stared long enough, footsteps would appear and lead Shouta to the kid. You may want to get home, though. It's like 2 hours past when you usually head home, and I don't think the precinct can handle another visit from a worried Mike looking for you. Shouta glances at the time on his phone before swearing loudly. His phone is busted, the screen not even lighting up. It must have happened when he was thrown. You got everything else here, he confirms with the detective. The man nods at him, and he thanks him once more before taking off home. When he finally makes it back home, he shows up right as a very distressed Hizashi is locking up and looking ready to head over to the precinct. The blond man turns around and finally sees Shouta. Sho! His face slackens with relief as he opens his arms waiting for Shouta to hug him. I'm okay, Zashi, Shouta says while holding up the broken phone in explanation. He lets Zashi wrap his arms around him and melts into the comfort it brings. After a stern warning about calling people and getting an indestructible phone case, they both head back inside. Shouta tells him about the green-haired boy and his concerns, and Hizashi frowns at the idea that someone is hurting the kid. Hizashi rubs his back soothingly as they slip off to bed, assuring Shouta they will find and help the boy. All right, listeners, this concludes Chapter 1 of Please Listen to What I Cannot Say Out Loud. Chapter 2 will be next. I hope you all enjoy this fic. I really like it a lot. I think it's a really cool concept, and I think the author does a really nice job of it. Please let me know your overall thoughts and reactions, though, and as always, thank you so much for listening.